The stagecoach lurched to a halt in Fort Worth, Texas, sending dust swirling through the late afternoon air, and Zara Ashford pressed her gloved hand against the leather seat to steady herself as she peered through the window at what would either become her salvation or her final disappointment. The year was 1876, and she had traveled over 800 miles from St. Louis with nothing but 2 carpetbags, a small inheritance from her grandmother, and a desperate need to escape the suffocating emptiness that had consumed her life after her parents died in the cholera outbreak 2 years prior. She was 23 years old, and the loneliness had become so profound that some mornings she woke up uncertain if she had actually spoken aloud the day before, or if all her words had remained trapped inside her head. Fort Worth stretched before her like a promise written in wooden buildings and dirt streets. Cattle lowed in distant pens, and the smell of livestock mixed with wood smoke and prairie grass. She stepped down from the coach, her burgundy traveling dress already coated in a fine layer of trail dust, and looked around at the bustling frontier town with a mixture of hope and trepidation. "Watch yourself, miss," the driver called down as he tossed her bags to the ground with less care than she would have liked. "This ain't St. Louis. Things run a bit rougher out here." Zara nodded, gathering her bags and making her way toward the boarding house she had corresponded with before leaving Missouri. The owner, a widow named Mrs. Patterson, had promised her a clean room and help finding respectable work. Teaching, perhaps, or assisting at the general store. Anything to build a new life, to find purpose, to fill the hollow spaces inside her chest where connection used to live. The boarding house stood 2 streets over from the main thoroughfare, a whitewashed building with green shutters that looked almost cheerful in the fading sunlight. Mrs. Patterson turned out to be a round woman in her 50s with kind eyes and flour on her apron. "You must be Miss Ashford," she said warmly, ushering Zara inside. Come in. You look absolutely exhausted, dear. Let me show you to your room and then I will bring up some supper. You can settle in properly tomorrow." The room was small but clean, with a bed covered in a faded quilt, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. Zara sat on the edge of the bed after Mrs. Patterson left and felt the weight of her journey settle over her shoulders. She had made it. She was here. Now came the harder part, figuring out how to actually live again. That night she lay awake listening to unfamiliar sounds. Somewhere down the street a piano played a lively tune. Men laughed and called to each other. A dog barked. It was so different from the quiet, lonely boarding house in St. Louis, where she had spent the last 2 years moving through life like a ghost, speaking to no one, connecting with no one, slowly disappearing into herself. The next morning, Zara woke early and dressed carefully in a simple blue day dress. Mrs. Patterson had mentioned over supper the previous evening that the schoolteacher position had recently been filled, but that the general store owner, Mr. Hendricks, might need help with bookkeeping. Zara was good with figures and had a neat hand. It seemed as good a place as any to start. She was pinning her dark hair up when she heard a commotion outside. Curious, she went to the window and looked down to see a group of cowboys driving cattle down the main street. Even from a distance, she could see they were skilled riders, moving as one with their horses, guiding the nervous longhorns with practiced ease. One rider in particular caught her attention. He sat tall in the saddle on a paint horse, his dark hat pulled low against the morning sun. Even amid the chaos of moving cattle, there was something calm and assured about the way he moved. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up suddenly, and even from 2 stories above, Zara felt the impact of his eyes meeting hers. She stepped back from the window quickly, her heart beating faster for reasons she could not quite name. She had not come to Fort Worth looking for romance. She had come looking for a life, for purpose, for an end to the loneliness. Romance was something she had stopped believing in when her parents died, and she realized how completely alone a person could be in the world. After breakfast, she made her way to Hendrick's General Store, a large establishment that seemed to sell everything from nails to calico fabric. Mr. Hendricks was a thin man with spectacles that kept sliding down his nose, and he seemed genuinely pleased when Zara explained her bookkeeping skills. "My wife usually handles the accounts," he said, gesturing toward the cluttered office in the back, "but she has been poorly lately, and I am afraid things have gotten rather behind. If you can make sense of this mess, the position is yours." Zara spent the rest of the morning organizing invoices and ledgers, finding a strange comfort in the orderly world of numbers and neat columns. She was so absorbed in her work that she did not notice the bell over the door chime or hear the heavy footsteps approaching until a deep voice said, "Excuse me, madam." She looked up to find the cowboy from that morning standing in front of the counter, hat in hand. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-bronzed skin, dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of strong coffee. There was a quiet strength about him, but also something gentler in the way he held himself, as if he was trying not to take up too much space. "Can I help you?" she asked, rising from the desk. "Looking for rope," he said, his voice carrying the slow drawl of Texas. "About 50 feet of good hemp rope, and some tobacco if you have it." "I will ask Mr. Hendricks about the rope," Zara said. "The tobacco is right here." As she gathered his items, she was acutely aware of his presence, the way he stood patiently, the way his hands turned his hat brim in a slow circle. When Mr. Hendricks confirmed they had the rope he needed, the cowboy paid and then hesitated, as if he wanted to say something else. "You are new in town," he said finally. It was not quite a question. "I arrived yesterday," Zara replied, "from St. Louis." "That is a long way to travel," he paused. "I am Dawson Turner. Most folks call me Daw. I work at the Triple Creek Ranch about 10 miles south of here." Zara Ashford. She found herself offering a small smile, the first genuine one she had given anyone in longer than she could remember. "Welcome to Fort Worth, Miss Ashford." He placed his hat back on his head and touched the brim in a polite gesture. "I hope you find it suits you." After he left, Zara stood behind the counter for a long moment, feeling strangely unsettled. There had been nothing improper or forward in the exchange, and yet something about Dawson Turner had reached past the walls she had built around herself. She shook her head and returned to the ledgers, determined not to let foolish romantic notions distract her from building the stable, sensible life she had come here to create. But over the following days, she found herself thinking about him more than she wanted to admit. Fort Worth was not a large town, and she saw him several times from a distance. Riding through town, loading supplies onto a wagon, talking with other ranch hands outside the saloon. He always seemed aware of his surroundings, always seemed to notice her even when she tried not to be obvious about watching. A week after her arrival, she was walking back to the boarding house after closing the store when she heard rapid hoofbeats behind her. She turned to see a horse galloping down the street, riderless and clearly spooked. People scattered out of the way, shouting, but the horse was heading straight toward an elderly man who had stumbled while trying to get clear. Before Zara could even cry out, a paint horse and rider came around the corner in pursuit. Dawson Turner leaned low in the saddle, his movements fluid and sure, and managed to catch the trailing reins of the runaway horse just before it reached the old man. He pulled both horses to a stop, speaking in low, soothing tones until the frightened animal calmed. The gathering crowd broke into spontaneous applause. Dawson dismounted, checked on the elderly man to ensure he was unharmed, and then led both horses toward the hitching post outside the saloon. As people dispersed, Zara found herself walking over to him. "That was remarkable," she said. He looked up from securing the horses, and something warm flickered in his eyes when he saw her. "Just part of the job, madam, though I would rather not have to do it on the main street." "Is the horse yours?" "Belongs to a fellow who had a bit too much whiskey and not enough sense," Dawson said, patting the still nervous animal's neck. "I will make sure it gets back to the ranch safely." Up close like this, in the golden light of late afternoon, Zara noticed details she had missed before. The small scar above his left eyebrow, the laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, even though his expression now was serious. The capable, calloused hands that handled the horses with such care. "You have a gift with animals," she observed. "I like them better than most people, truth be told," he said, then seemed to catch himself. "Present company accepted, of course." She laughed, a real laugh that surprised her with its spontaneity. "No offense taken. I have often felt the same way." He studied her for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. "Are you settling in all right? Fort Worth can be overwhelming if you are used to city life." "Actually, St. Louis felt far more overwhelming," Zara admitted. "Too many people, but somehow I felt more alone there than I do here." The words came out before she could stop them, more honest than she had intended. She saw understanding flash across Dawson's face, as if he recognized something familiar in her confession. "I know that feeling," he said quietly. "I grew up in a big family back in Tennessee. 8 kids, always noise, always someone needing something. I thought when I came out here I would enjoy the solitude. And I do, mostly. But there is a difference between choosing to be alone and feeling lonely in the middle of everything." It was the longest speech she had heard from him, and the vulnerability in it made her chest tighten. Here was someone who understood, someone who knew what it meant to feel disconnected even when surrounded by others. "Yes," she said simply. "Exactly that." They stood there for a moment, an understanding passing between them that needed no further words. Then a voice called Dawson's name from the saloon, and the spell broke. "I should get these horses sorted," he said, but he did not move immediately. "Miss Ashford, there is a church social this Sunday after services. Just a simple meal, some music. Mostly it is an excuse for folks to gather and visit. Would you consider attending? Mrs. Patterson usually goes, and I am sure she would be happy to introduce you around." "Are you inviting me?" Zara asked, surprised by her own boldness. A slow smile spread across his face, transforming it. "I suppose I am. I will be there as well. It would be good to see a friendly face." "Then yes," Zara heard herself say. "I will attend." She walked back to the boarding house feeling lighter than she had in 2 years, as if something frozen inside her chest was beginning to thaw. That night at supper, she mentioned the social to Mrs. Patterson, who lit up with pleasure. "Oh, how wonderful. Yes, everyone in town comes. It is the best way to meet people properly. And I must say, dear, you have been looking rather pale. Some sunshine and fresh air will do you good." Sunday arrived bright and clear. The church was a simple white building with a tall steeple, and by the time services ended, tables had been set up outside laden with food brought by various families. Zara had helped Mrs. Patterson make a blackberry cobbler, and she felt nervous as she carried it to the dessert table. She knew a few people by now from the store, and they greeted her warmly. But she found her eyes searching the crowd until she spotted Dawson talking with a group of men near the musicians who were setting up their instruments. He wore clean clothes, his hair still damp from washing, and when he caught sight of her, he excused himself immediately and walked over. "You came," he said, and there was genuine pleasure in his voice. I said I would. People say a lot of things. He offered his arm. Would you like me to introduce you to some folks? I know Mrs. Patterson knows everyone, but sometimes it helps to have someone your own age making introductions. Zara took his arm, feeling the solid strength of it beneath her hand, and let him guide her through the social. He introduced her to ranch families, shop owners, the blacksmith and his wife. Everyone was friendly, curious about the new arrival from St. Louis, welcoming in the way that frontier communities often were to respectable newcomers. But what struck Zara most was how different Dawson was in this setting. He was clearly well-liked and respected. People clapped him on the shoulder, asked his opinion on livestock and weather, teased him good-naturedly about when he was going to settle down and stop breaking hearts. "I have not broken any hearts," he protested to one older woman who made such a comment. "Only because you have not given any of the local girls a chance to lose theirs," she retorted, then winked at Zara. "Maybe this young lady will change your mind." Dawson's ears turned slightly red, but he handled the teasing with good humor. When the music started and people began to dance, he turned to Zara with a questioning look. "I am not much of a dancer," he admitted, "but I can manage a simple reel if you are willing to risk your toes." "I will take that risk," Zara said. He led her to the cleared space where couples were forming sets. The music was lively, played on fiddle and guitar, and the dance was indeed simple enough that even those with little skill could follow along. Dawson moved with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else, and Zara found herself laughing as they turned and stepped and promenaded with the other dancers. When was the last time she had danced? She could not even remember, certainly not since her parents died. The loneliness had made everything feel pointless, including joy. But here, now, with Dawson's hand warm in hers and music filling the air and people smiling all around them, she felt something she had almost forgotten. The simple pleasure of being part of something, of connecting with another person, of being alive and present in the moment. When the dance ended, they were both slightly breathless. Dawson led her away from the crowd to where lemonade was being served, and they found a spot under a large oak tree where they could sit and catch their breath. "You said you were not much of a dancer," Zara said, "but I think you were being modest. My sister Mary taught all of us boys before I left Tennessee. She said we needed to know how so we would not embarrass the family at gatherings." His expression softened with the memory. "I have not thought about that in years. Do you miss them? Your family?" "Sometimes," he admitted, "but there were so many of us and the farm was barely producing enough to feed everyone. When I turned 18, I knew I needed to make my own way. Came out here, learned to work cattle, found I had a knack for it." He paused. "What about you? Do you have family back in St. Louis?" Zara shook her head. "My parents both passed 2 years ago in the cholera outbreak. I was an only child. There are some distant cousins, but no one close." She took a breath. "After they died, I tried to keep living in the same house, working at the same dress shop, seeing the same people. But everywhere I went, I was surrounded by ghosts and memories. The loneliness became unbearable. I woke up one morning and realized if I stayed, I would just fade away entirely. So I decided to start fresh somewhere new." Dawson was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the distant horizon. "I am sorry about your parents. That must have been terrible." It was. But what came after was worse in some ways. The isolation, the feeling that I did not matter to anyone, that I could disappear and no one would truly notice or care. She looked down at her hands. "I know that sounds self-pitying. It sounds honest." He turned to face her fully. "I have felt something similar. Not from loss like yours, but from being out here. You can ride for hours and see nothing but grass and sky. You can go days speaking only to horses and cattle. At first, I told myself I preferred it that way. But over time, I realized I was using the solitude to hide. From what, I am still not entirely sure, maybe from the risk of actually letting people know me. The vulnerability in his words made Zara's throat tight. Why are you telling me this? Because I think you understand, he said simply. And because from the moment I saw you at that window your first day here, I have wanted to talk to you. Really talk, not just polite exchanges about rope and tobacco. I have wanted to know who you are. I am not sure I know who I am anymore, Zara admitted. I feel like I lost myself somewhere along the way. Then maybe we can both figure it out, Dawson said. Who we are, what we want. Out here you can be whoever you choose to be. The past does not have to define everything. They talked until the shadows grew long and families began packing up to head home. Zara learned that Dawson had been working at Triple Creek Ranch for 6 years, that he had a small cabin on the property, that his dream was to eventually own his own land and build up a modest herd. He learned that she loved to read, that she had taught herself bookkeeping from her father's ledgers, that she had a dream of one day having a real home again, a place that felt like it belonged to her and she to it. When it was time to leave, Dawson walked her and Mrs. Patterson back to the boarding house, leading his horse alongside them. At the front steps, he hesitated, hat in hand again in that gesture Zara was beginning to find endearing. I come into town most Saturdays for supplies, he said. Would it be acceptable if I called on you? Properly, I mean. If you are interested. Mrs. Patterson, who had been pretending not to listen, made a small encouraging noise and hurried inside, leaving them alone. Zara felt her heart beating fast. This was what she had come here hoping to find, was it not? Connection, purpose, a reason to feel less alone. And yet the thought of opening herself up to someone, of risking the pain that came with caring, still frightened her. But Dawson was looking at her with such open hopefulness, such genuine interest, that she found herself nodding before fear could change her mind. Yes, she said. I would like that very much. His smile was like sunrise. Saturday, then. I will come by around 2 if that suits you. 2 would be perfect. He mounted his paint horse with easy grace, tipped his hat to her once more, and rode off into the gathering dusk. Zara stood on the porch long after he disappeared from view, hugging herself against the cooling air and feeling something she had not felt in so long. Anticipation for the future. The week passed in a strange mixture of routine and excitement. Zara worked at the store, organized the accounts into perfect order, helped Mrs. Patterson with household chores, and counted down the days until Saturday. She told herself she was being foolish, that one conversation and one dance did not mean anything significant, but her heart refused to listen to reason. On Saturday morning, she changed her dress 3 times before finally settling on a green cotton print that brought out her eyes. Mrs. Patterson watched this performance with obvious amusement. That young man has certainly made an impression, she said. Is he well regarded in town? Zara asked, trying to sound casual. I barely know anything about him. Dawson Turner is as solid as they come, Mrs. Patterson said firmly. Hard worker, honest, respectful. Keeps to himself mostly, but he has helped more than one family in need without making a fuss about it. Last winter, when the Hendersons' barn burned down, he was out there every evening after his own work was done, helping to rebuild. Never asked for anything in return. This matched everything Zara had observed about him, but it was reassuring to hear it confirmed. When 2 o'clock came, Dawson arrived precisely on time, his horse freshly brushed and his own clothes clean. He had even shaved, though Zara found herself missing the slight shadow of stubble she had noticed at the church social. I thought we might take a walk, he suggested. If you would like, there is a nice path along the river, not too far from town." Zara agreed, and they set off with Dawson leading his horse. The afternoon was warm but not unpleasantly hot, with a breeze carrying the scent of prairie grass and wildflowers. As they walked, the conversation flowed more easily than Zara had dared hope. They talked about everything and nothing: books they had read, places they had seen, small observations about life in Fort Worth. The river turned out to be a shallow, clear-running stream with cottonwood trees providing shade along its banks. They found a smooth rock to sit on, and Dawson's horse wandered nearby, grazing contentedly. "I have been thinking about what you said last week," Dawson said after a comfortable silence, "about feeling like you lost yourself. I wonder if maybe we do not lose ourselves so much as we get buried under grief and loneliness and all the weight of just trying to survive. And maybe the real self is still there, just waiting for the right circumstances to emerge again." "That is a very hopeful perspective," Zara said. "I try to be hopeful. The alternative seems pretty bleak." He picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in his hands. "When I first came out here, I was running away from being the fourth son in a family that could barely feed everyone. I felt like I did not matter, like I was just another mouth to feed, another body taking up space. Being out here, making my own way, proving I could survive on my own skills, it helped. But I think I took it too far in the other direction. I got so used to being alone that I started to think I preferred it that way. Started to think maybe I was not meant for anything else." "What changed?" Zara asked softly. He met her eyes. "Honestly, seeing you in that window, I know that sounds absurd. We had never even spoken. But something about the look on your face, the way you were watching the world like you were on the outside of it, I recognized it. I recognized you somehow, and I realized I did not want to be on the outside anymore." Zara felt her breath catch. "I saw you too, that first morning. I thought there was something different about you, but I could not put it into words." "Maybe we recognized each other because we are alike," Dawson suggested. "Both trying to find our way back to ourselves, both tired of being lonely." "I am tired of it," Zara admitted. "So tired. Do you know what it feels like to go days without anyone truly seeing you, without mattering to anyone? After my parents died, I became invisible. People were kind enough, but I was just the sad orphan girl who served them at the dress shop. No one really knew me, and I stopped trying to let them." Dawson reached over and gently took her hand. The gesture was both bold and tender, and Zara felt warmth spread through her from the point of contact. "I see you," he said quietly, "and I would like to know you, the real you, not some version you think you should be. If you are willing to let me try." Tears pricked at Zara's eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were the tears that came from being truly heard, truly seen after so long in the shadows. "I would like that," she whispered. "And I would like to know you too, the real you." They sat there by the river for hours, hands clasped, talking and sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. Dawson told her about the ranch, about the work he did, about the satisfaction of seeing cattle thrive under his care. Zara told him about her childhood, about her father's dry humor and her mother's beautiful singing voice, about the pain of watching them both sicken and die within weeks of each other. The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon when they finally made their way back to town. At the boarding house steps, Dawson hesitated again, and Zara could see he was working up the courage to say something. "I know we have only known each other a short time," he said finally, "but I would like to continue seeing you, courting you properly, if that is something you might want as well." "Yes," Zara said, no hesitation this time. "I want that very much. I work 6 days a week at the ranch, but I am free most Sundays after church, and I can usually get into town on Saturday afternoons. Would that be enough? I mean, I know it is not much." "It is enough," Zara assured him. More than enough. His relief was visible. Then I will see you at church tomorrow, you will. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Dawson came to town every Saturday afternoon, and they would walk together, sometimes along the river, sometimes just through town, talking and learning each other. On Sundays, they sat together at church and spent the afternoon at various social gatherings or simply walking and talking more. Zara found herself coming alive in a way she had not been since before her parents died. The loneliness that had been her constant companion began to recede, replaced by anticipation and joy. She smiled more. She laughed more. She engaged with the people of Fort Worth instead of just moving through life like a ghost. Mrs. Patterson noticed the change and approved heartily. "I have not seen Dawson this happy either," she told Zara one evening. "That boy has been too serious for too long. You are good for each other." After about 2 months of courting, Dawson asked if Zara would like to see the ranch where he worked. "I know it is not entirely proper without a chaperone," he said, "but I thought maybe Mrs. Patterson might come along. I would like you to see where I spend my days, what my life looks like out there." Mrs. Patterson agreed readily, and the following Saturday they all rode out to Triple Creek Ranch in a wagon Dawson had borrowed. The ranch was expansive, with rolling grassland dotted with cattle, and several buildings clustered around a main house. The owner, a weathered man named Mr. Carlyle, welcomed them warmly and invited them all for lunch. "Dawson here is the best hand I have ever had," Mr. Carlyle told Zara over plates of beef and potatoes. "Honest, hard-working, knows cattle better than most men twice his age. I keep telling him he should think about getting his own place, building up his own herd. He has saved enough money to make a start." Dawson looked uncomfortable with the praise, but did not deny it. After lunch, he showed Zara around the property while Mrs. Patterson visited with Mrs. Carlyle. He showed her the cattle pens, the barn where they kept the horses, and finally his own small cabin set a little apart from the main buildings. It was a simple one-room structure, neatly kept, with a bed, a table, a stove, and a few personal belongings. Books lined a small shelf near the window, and Zara was touched to see several titles she had mentioned enjoying. "I sent away for them," Dawson admitted when he saw her noticing. "I thought maybe we could talk about them, if you had time to read them again." The thoughtfulness of the gesture made Zara's heart swell. She walked around the small space, imagining what it must be like for him here, alone at the end of each long day. "You ever get lonely out here?" she asked. "I used to," he said, "before I met you. Now I just count the days until I can see you again." He paused, then added quietly, "Zara, these past 2 months have been the happiest I can remember. You have changed everything for me." She turned to face him, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "You have changed everything for me, too. I came to Fort Worth to escape loneliness, but I did not really believe I would find anything to fill that emptiness. I thought I would just build a tolerable life and make peace with being alone. But then I met you, and suddenly I am not alone anymore. Suddenly there is someone who sees me, who knows me, who makes me feel like I matter." Dawson crossed the small space between them and gently cupped her face in his hands. "You matter, Zara. You matter so much. And I know this is probably too soon, but I need you to know that I am falling in love with you. Maybe I have been since that first moment." Tears spilled down Zara's cheeks. "It is not too soon. I am falling in love with you too. I think I have been since you stopped that runaway horse, and I saw how brave and capable and good you are." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. It was Zara's first real kiss, and it felt like coming home to a place she had never been, but had somehow always been searching for. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Dawson rested his forehead against hers. "I want to build a life with you," he said. "I want to buy land, build a house, raise cattle and maybe children if you want them. I want to make sure you never feel lonely or invisible again. I want to spend every day showing you that you matter, that you are seen, that you are loved." "Yes," Zara whispered. "Yes to all of it. I want that too. I want a life with you." They stood there in the small cabin, holding each other, both understanding that something fundamental had shifted. They had found what they had been searching for, perhaps without even knowing they were searching. When they returned to the main house, Mrs. Patterson took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly, but asked no questions. The ride back to Fort Worth was quiet, but it was the comfortable quiet of people who understood each other, who had found something precious and were still marveling at their good fortune. That evening, Dawson spoke to Mrs. Patterson privately and then to Zara. "I would like to marry you," he said. "I know the proper thing would be to court you for a year or more, to wait and be patient. But we are not children, and we both know what we want. If you are willing, I would like to speak to the preacher about performing the ceremony within the month." "Yes," Zara said again, that word becoming her favorite in the English language. "Yes, I will marry you." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Zara had little in the way of family or possessions, but the women of Fort Worth rallied around her, helping her sew a simple white dress, organizing a small reception, offering advice and good wishes. Dawson made arrangements to buy a parcel of land adjacent to Triple Creek Ranch, and Mr. Carlyle agreed to sell him several head of cattle at a fair price to start his own herd. "You have earned this," Mr. Carlyle told him, "and I am happy to have you as a neighbor. You will do well." The wedding took place on a bright Sunday morning in late September. The church was full of people from town and from the surrounding ranches, all coming to celebrate with them. Zara wore her new white dress and carried wildflowers that Mrs. Patterson had gathered. Dawson wore a new shirt and vest, his dark hair neatly combed, his eyes bright with happiness. As Zara walked down the aisle, she thought about the journey that had brought her here, the loneliness that had driven her from St. Louis, the fear that she would never connect with anyone again. The morning she had seen a cowboy driving cattle through the street and felt something shift inside her. And here he stood, waiting for her at the altar, this good man who had somehow found her in her isolation and had refused to let her remain there, who had shown her that loneliness was not a permanent condition, but something that could be healed with connection and care and love. The preacher spoke about the sanctity of marriage, about commitment and faith, and building a life together. But Zara barely heard the words. She was too focused on Dawson's face, on the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world, on the strength and warmth of his hand holding hers. "I do," she said when the moment came, her voice clear and strong. "I do," Dawson echoed. And then they were kissing and everyone was applauding and they were married. The reception was held outside the church, with tables laden with food and a fiddle player providing music. People came up to offer congratulations and good wishes, and Zara felt embraced by the community in a way she had never experienced before. These people cared about her. She mattered to them. She belonged. As the afternoon wore on, Dawson pulled her aside. "Are you ready to see our land?" he asked. "I have been working on something, and I want to show you." They said goodbye to the well-wishers and rode out together on Dawson's paint horse, Zara sitting in front of him with his arms around her, both of them giddy with happiness and the enormity of what they had just done. The land Dawson had purchased was beautiful, a stretch of rolling prairie with a creek running through it and a stand of cottonwood trees on a slight rise. And there, under the cottonwoods, stood the frame of a house. Zara gasped. "Dawson, when did you?" "I have been working on it every spare moment for the past 3 weeks," he said. "Mr. Carlyle and some of the other hands helped. It is not finished yet, but I wanted to have at least the frame up before we married. I wanted you to be able to see it, to know that I am building something real for us." Zara slid down from the horse and walked toward the structure. It was not large, but it was well built, with sturdy beams and a good foundation. She could imagine the rooms taking shape, the walls going up, the windows letting in light. She could see the life they would build here. "It is perfect," she said, turning to find Dawson had come up behind her. "Everything is perfect. I will make you happy," he promised, pulling her close. "I will spend every day of my life making sure you never feel alone or unseen again. You are my wife now, and I take that seriously. You matter to me more than anything in this world." "You have already made me happy," Zara said, wrapping her arms around him. "You saved me, Dawson. I was drowning in loneliness and you pulled me out. You gave me a reason to live again, not just exist." "We saved each other," he corrected gently. "I was lonely too, remember? I just did not know how to admit it until I met you." They made camp that night under the cottonwoods, on the land that was now theirs, and consummated their marriage under the stars. It was tender and sweet and fumbling in the way of first times, but it was also full of love and promise, and the joy of two people who had found each other against the odds. In the months that followed, Dawson finished building their house while Zara continued working at the general store and saved every penny. By Christmas, the house was complete. 3 rooms with a real wood floor, glass windows, and a stone fireplace that Dawson had built himself. They moved in on a cold December day, and Zara cried when she walked through the door, overwhelmed by the reality of having a home again. "This is ours," she kept saying. "Really ours. Really ours," Dawson confirmed, holding her close. "And it is just the beginning." He was right. Over the next year, their small ranch began to thrive. The cattle Dawson had purchased bred successfully, and he was able to buy more. Zara discovered she had a talent for managing the business side of the ranch, keeping meticulous records and negotiating fair prices when they sold cattle. Together, they made a formidable team. But more than the material success, what grew between them was a deep and abiding love. They learned each other's rhythms and habits. They learned to work together, to support each other, to communicate even when things were difficult. They learned that loneliness was not something you fixed once and forgot about, but something you actively kept at bay through connection and care and choosing each other every single day. Zara sometimes thought about the woman she had been when she arrived in Fort Worth. Isolated, grieving, so lonely she could barely function. That woman felt like a stranger now. In her place was someone who laughed easily, who had purpose and direction, who woke up every morning grateful for her life. 2 years after their wedding, Zara discovered she was pregnant. She told Dawson one evening as they sat on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over their land. "We are going to have a baby," she said simply. Dawson went very still, then turned to her with wonder in his eyes. "Truly, truly." He pulled her into his arms, and she felt him trembling slightly. "I am going to be a father," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Zara asked, though she could already see the answer on his face. Happy does not even begin to cover it. He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "You have given me everything, Zara. A home, a purpose, a reason to be better, and now this, a family of our own." The pregnancy was not easy. Zara was sick for the first few months, and the summer heat made her uncomfortable. But Dawson was attentive and patient, taking on extra work so she could rest, bringing her cool water and whatever food she could stomach, reading to her in the evenings when she was too tired to do anything but lie still. "You do not have to do all this," she protested one particularly difficult day. "You work so hard already." "You are carrying our child," he said simply. "Nothing is more important than making sure you are both healthy and cared for. This is what I am here for, Zara. To make sure you never face anything alone." In early spring of 1879, their son was born after a long and difficult labor. They named him Thomas, after Dawson's father, and from the moment Zara held him, she felt something shift in her understanding of love. She had thought she knew what it meant to love Dawson, but this was different, deeper, more primal. Dawson was equally besotted. He would sit for hours just watching Thomas sleep, marveling at his tiny fingers and the way his face scrunched up when he dreamed. "We made this," he would say in wonder. "We created this perfect little person." The first year of parenthood was exhausting but joyful. They took turns walking the floor with Thomas when he cried. They marveled at every milestone, his first smile, his first tooth, his first word. Their house filled with the sounds of baby laughter and crying, and all the beautiful chaos of new life. When Thomas was 6 months old, Mrs. Patterson came to visit and brought news that Mr. Hendricks was looking to sell the general store. His wife's health had not improved, and they wanted to move to California to be near their daughter. "I know you love the ranch," Mrs. Patterson said to Zara, "but I also know you miss working with numbers and managing accounts. I thought you might want to know." Zara and Dawson discussed it that night. The ranch was doing well enough that they could potentially afford to buy the store, and having a second source of income would provide security. But it would mean Zara taking on significant responsibility while also caring for Thomas. "What do you want?" Dawson asked. "Not what makes sense financially, not what anyone else thinks you should do. What do you want?" Zara thought about it carefully. "I want both," she admitted. "I love our life here, and I would never want to give up the ranch. But I also miss the work at the store, the sense of accomplishment, the connection with people in town. Is it foolish to want everything?" "It is not foolish," Dawson said, "and I think we can make it work." Mrs. Patterson said the store comes with the living quarters above it. "What if we hired someone to manage the day-to-day operations, and you handled the business side and the bookkeeping? You could ride into town a few times a week, stay overnight if needed, and still be here most of the time. I can handle things at the ranch and care for Thomas when you are gone." It was not a perfect solution, but it was workable. They bought the store, hired a capable young woman named Sarah to manage the counter and sales, and Zara took over the accounts and business decisions. The arrangement worked better than she had dared hope. She enjoyed the intellectual challenge of running a business, and the income from the store allowed them to expand the ranch more quickly than they could have otherwise. 3 years after Thomas was born, Zara gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Grace. The house that had once seemed spacious suddenly felt quite full, but it was a good fullness, the kind that came from love and family and belonging. Dawson proved to be a wonderful father, patient and playful, equally comfortable changing diapers as he was roping cattle. He taught Thomas to ride almost as soon as the boy could walk, and he was gentle and tender with the twins, singing them to sleep with old Tennessee folk songs his own mother had sung to him. Sometimes, late at night when the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Dawson and Zara would sit together on the porch and marvel at how far they had come. "You remember what you said that first day at the river?" Zara asked one such night. "About how maybe we do not lose ourselves, we just get buried under grief and loneliness. I remember. You were right. I had not lost myself. I was just waiting for the right person to help me find my way back." She leaned against him, feeling his arm come around her shoulders. "You did that for me, Dawson. You saw me when I was invisible. You made me feel like I mattered when I thought I never would again. You took away my loneliness and gave me love in its place. You did the same for me, he said quietly. I was just better at hiding how lonely I was. But I was drowning in it, same as you, and then you came to town and everything changed. He kissed the top of her head. Best day of my life seeing you in that window. Best decision of my life coming to Fort Worth. As the years passed, their ranch continued to grow. Thomas grew into a capable young man who loved the land as much as his father did. The twins were bright and curious, always getting into mischief but full of laughter and joy. Zara and Dawson added on to the house, expanding it to accommodate their growing family. The store thrived under Zara's management, becoming one of the most successful businesses in Fort Worth. She proved to have a sharp business mind and a talent for knowing what people needed before they knew it themselves. Dawson often joked that she could sell ice to an Eskimo, and she would laugh and swat his arm and tell him to mind his own business, namely the cattle. But through all the busy years of raising children and building businesses and managing a ranch, they never lost sight of what had brought them together. The deep loneliness they had both felt, and their commitment to making sure neither of them ever felt that way again. They made time for each other, even when it was hard. Sunday afternoons were still their time, just the two of them walking along the river or riding out to check on the far pastures. They talked about everything: the children, the ranch, the store, their hopes and dreams and fears. They worked through disagreements with honesty and respect. They laughed together. They supported each other's dreams. When Thomas turned 18, Dawson offered him a full partnership in the ranch. "You have earned this," he told his son. "You work as hard as any hand we have ever had, and this land will be yours someday. Might as well start having a say in how we run it now." Thomas accepted with pride and gratitude, and Zara watched her husband and son working side by side, feeling a deep contentment. This was what she had dreamed of during those lonely years in St. Louis. Family, connection, belonging, purpose. She had found it all here in Fort Worth with the cowboy who had made sure she never felt alone again. The twins grew into beautiful young women, each with their own distinct personality. Emma was quiet and thoughtful, with a gift for healing that led her to study with the town doctor. Grace was bold and adventurous, declaring at 15 that she wanted to raise horses and never planned to marry unless she found a man who could keep up with her. Zara and Dawson watched their children grow and find their own paths with a mixture of pride and bittersweet awareness that time was passing. They were in their 40s now, not old but no longer young, their faces weathered by sun and wind and hard work, their bodies bearing the marks of years spent building a life from nothing. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, Dawson took Zara's hand. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Leaving St. Louis, coming out here, marrying a cowboy instead of someone more refined?" Zara looked at him in surprise. "Not for one single moment. Why would you even ask that? Sometimes I wonder if you might have been happier with an easier life. Someone who could have given you more, taken you to cities and theaters and fine restaurants. Dawson Turner, you listen to me." Zara turned to face him fully, her hands gripping his. "You gave me everything that matters. You gave me love when I had forgotten what it felt like. You gave me a home when I had nothing. You gave me purpose and connection and a family. You saw me when I was invisible, and you have spent every day since making sure I know that I matter. That is worth more than all the theaters and fine restaurants in the world." He smiled, but she could see the emotion in his eyes. "I just want to make sure you know that you saved me too. I tell you that you saved me from loneliness, but it is more than that. You saved me from becoming someone hard and closed off. You taught me how to open my heart again. You gave me reasons to hope and dream and believe in something bigger than just surviving day to day. We saved each other, Zara said, echoing what he had told her on their wedding night all those years ago. That is what love does. It saves us from isolation and loneliness. It reminds us that we are not meant to go through life alone. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun finished setting and stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere inside the house, they could hear the twins laughing about something, and Thomas's deeper voice joining in. These were the sounds of home, of family, of a life well lived. 25 years after Zara first arrived in Fort Worth, the town held a celebration in honor of its founding. There were speeches and music and tables laden with food, much like that first church social where Dawson had asked her to dance. But now, Zara stood as one of the town's most respected citizens, a successful businesswoman and the matriarch of a thriving family. As part of the celebration, the mayor asked several long-time residents to share their stories of coming to Fort Worth and building their lives there. When it was Zara's turn, she stood before the gathered crowd with Dawson at her side and felt surprisingly nervous. "I came to Fort Worth in the summer of 1876, she began, her voice carrying across the crowd. "I was running away from loneliness so profound I could barely function. I had lost my parents, and in losing them, I had lost myself. I came here hoping to build a tolerable life, nothing more. I did not believe I deserved happiness or connection. I just wanted to survive." She paused, finding Dawson's eyes in the crowd. He smiled at her, that warm, encouraging smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. "But then I met a cowboy who refused to let me stay invisible. He saw me when I thought no one could. He offered me friendship, and then love, and then a life beyond anything I had imagined possible. He made sure I never felt alone again." Her voice thickened with emotion. "Fort Worth gave me a fresh start, but Dawson Turner gave me a reason to take it. Together we built this life, a ranch, a family, a home, and I am grateful for every single day." The crowd applauded, and several people wiped their eyes. Dawson stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her, and Zara held onto him, feeling the same rush of love and gratitude she had felt that day by the river when he first told her he was falling in love with her. After the speeches ended and the dancing began, Dawson led her to the cleared space, just as he had done 25 years earlier. They moved through the familiar steps of the reel, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Thomas had married 2 years earlier and already had a baby son of his own, by friends and neighbors, by the community they had helped build. "Still willing to risk your toes?" Dawson murmured as they turned. "Always," Zara replied, laughing. As the music played and the stars came out overhead, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had come to Fort Worth desperate and lonely, seeking escape from a life that felt empty. She had found so much more than escape. She had found love, purpose, belonging, and joy. She had found a partner who understood her deepest fears and her highest hopes. She had built a life that mattered, surrounded by people who saw her and valued her. And it had all started with a cowboy who looked up at a window and saw a lonely woman watching the world go by, and who decided to make sure she never felt alone again. Years continued to pass, bringing new joys and inevitable sorrows. Zara's beloved Mrs. Patterson passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, and Zara mourned the woman who had been like a mother to her in Fort Worth. Dawson's brother came to visit from Tennessee, bringing news of family back east and staying long enough to see what Dawson had built for himself. Through it all, Zara and Dawson remained each other's constant. They grew older together, their hair graying, their movements slowing, but their love only deepening with time. They had weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical. Droughts that threatened the cattle, illnesses that scared them, financial uncertainties, and the normal trials of raising a family. But they had weathered it all together, never losing sight of the fundamental truth that had brought them together. They were better together than apart, stronger as a team than as individuals. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children surprised them with a party at the ranch. The house that Dawson had built with his own hands was filled with laughter and love, with 3 generations gathered to celebrate. Thomas gave a toast, his voice strong and clear. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught me what real love looks like. Not the easy, romantic kind you see in books, but the hard, daily kind that shows up even when things are difficult. The kind that chooses to see the best in each other, that works through problems instead of running from them, that builds something lasting and true." He smiled at them. "You two started with nothing but hope and determination, and you built this incredible life. You gave us a home, a heritage, and most importantly, you showed us how to love well. Thank you for that." Zara was crying openly by the time he finished, and Dawson's eyes were suspiciously bright. The twins added their own words of appreciation, and even the grandchildren participated, the older ones sharing memories and the younger ones just happy to be part of the celebration. Late that night, after everyone had gone home or gone to bed, Zara and Dawson sat on the porch as they had done countless times before. The ranch spread out before them in the moonlight, peaceful and prosperous. 30 years, Dawson said quietly. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday you stepped off that stagecoach. Sometimes it feels like we have been together forever." "Both are true," Zara said, leaning against him. "That is the strange thing about love. It makes time feel both fleeting and eternal." "Do you remember what I promised you on our wedding day?" Dawson asked. "That I would make sure you never felt alone or unseen again." "I remember." "Did I keep that promise?" Zara turned to look at him, this man who had been her partner, her love, her best friend for 3 decades. His face was lined now, his dark hair liberally streaked with silver, but his eyes still held the same warmth and strength that had first drawn her to him. "You have kept that promise every single day," she said softly. "Not just by being present, but by truly seeing me. By knowing me, even the parts I tried to hide. By loving me through every season of life. You took a lonely, lost woman and showed her how to live again. You gave me everything, Dawson. You gave me just as much," he insisted. "More even. You gave me purpose and joy and a reason to be better than I thought I could be. You turned a solitary cowboy into a husband, a father, a man with roots and connections and love to spare." He kissed her forehead gently. "Marrying you was the best decision I ever made, and I would make it again in a heartbeat." They sat together under the stars, wrapped in each other's arms, content in the life they had built and the love they had nurtured. The loneliness that had once defined both their lives was nothing but a distant memory now, replaced by the deep, abiding connection they shared. As Zara drifted toward sleep, warm and safe in Dawson's embrace, she thought about the terrified, isolated woman who had stepped off that stagecoach 30 years ago. She wished she could go back and tell that woman what waited for her in Fort Worth. A love that would heal her wounds, a partner who would walk beside her through everything, a family that would fill her heart to overflowing, and a life so rich and full that she would sometimes wonder how one person could contain so much happiness. She came to escape her loneliness, but she found so much more. She found her home, her purpose, and her heart. And the cowboy who had spotted her in that window on her first day in town had made good on his unspoken promise from that very first moment. He made sure she never felt alone again. The years that followed brought the natural progression of life. Emma became the town's most sought-after healer. Using both traditional medicine and remedies, she learned from the local indigenous people, who sometimes came to town to trade. Grace, true to her word, started a successful horse breeding operation, eventually marrying a quiet rancher who indeed could keep up with her spirit. Thomas expanded the ranch with his father's guidance, eventually taking over day-to-day operations as Dawson's joints grew stiff with arthritis. Zara handed over management of the store to a young couple who reminded her of herself and Dawson when they were starting out. Ambitious, hardworking, and deeply in love. She stayed on as a silent partner, offering advice when asked but mostly enjoying her role as grandmother to an ever-growing number of grandchildren. She and Dawson settled into a comfortable rhythm in their later years. They rose with the sun more out of habit than necessity now. They took slow walks around the property, Dawson pointing out changes and improvements Thomas had made, Zara commenting on how the cottonwood trees they had planted years ago had grown tall and strong. They spent long afternoons on the porch, reading or simply sitting together in companionable silence. On Sundays, the whole family still gathered for dinner at the ranch house. The table Dawson had built when they first married had been expanded several times to accommodate everyone, and the noise level during these gatherings was considerable. But it was a joyful noise, the sound of life and love and connection. During one such gathering, Dawson's hand trembled as he carved the roast, and Zara saw Thomas notice. Her son caught her eye, and she saw the understanding there. Time was catching up with them. They were both in their 60s now, which was a good long life for people who had worked as hard as they had. But the reality of mortality was becoming harder to ignore. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Dawson took Zara's hand. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice serious. Fear clutched at Zara's heart. "What is it?" "I am getting older, and I know my body is not what it used to be. And I want to make sure you know that every single day with you has been a gift. If I died tomorrow, I would die a happy man, Zara, because you gave me a life worth living. You gave me love worth having. Whatever time I have left, I want to spend it making sure you know how much you mean to me." Tears streamed down Zara's face. "You are not going anywhere yet, Dawson Turner. We still have years ahead of us. I am not done with you," he smiled, but there was a sadness in his eyes. "None of us know how much time we have. I just need you to know that you were the best thing that ever happened to me. Coming into town that day and seeing you in that window, getting up the courage to actually talk to you, courting you, marrying you, building this life with you. It was all worth every moment. You made me whole, Zara. You took a lonely cowboy and gave him everything. And you took a lonely woman and gave her the world," Zara whispered, holding him tight. "We are not finished yet, my love. We still have more life to live." And they did. 5 more good years, during which they watched more grandchildren be born, saw Thomas's son begin to take an interest in ranching, celebrated Emma's marriage to the doctor she had been studying with, and danced at Grace's daughter's christening. They took trips into Fort Worth less frequently, but when they did go, people still greeted them warmly, still treated them with the respect due to the pioneers who had helped build the town into what it had become. But time, as it always does, eventually caught up with them. Dawson's health began to decline in earnest when he was 68. The arthritis that had bothered him for years grew worse, and his breathing became labored. The doctor diagnosed him with a weak heart and told the family to prepare for the inevitable. Dawson faced his mortality with the same quiet courage he had brought to everything else in life. He made sure all his affairs were in order, that Thomas knew everything he needed to know about running the ranch, that his daughters knew how much he loved them. But mostly, he focused on Zara. "I am sorry," he told her one evening as they sat together in the bedroom they had shared for nearly 40 years. "I know I promised you would never be alone again, and here I am about to leave you." "Stop that," Zara said fiercely, though tears streamed down her face. "You kept your promise, Dawson. You gave me decades of love and companionship. You gave me children and grandchildren, a whole family to surround me. I will never truly be alone again, even after you are gone, because you made sure I had connections, had roots, had people who love me. That is what you promised, and you more than kept it." He reached for her hand, his grip weaker than it used to be but still warm. "I love you, Zara Ashford Turner. Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life." "And loving you has been mine," she whispered, pressing kisses to his weathered hand. "You saved me, Dawson. You saw me when I was invisible. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. You gave me everything." Dawson Turner died peacefully in his sleep 2 weeks later, with Zara lying beside him holding his hand. He was 68 years old, and he had lived a full, rich life surrounded by the family he and Zara had built together. The funeral was attended by what seemed like everyone in Fort Worth and the surrounding ranches. People came to pay their respects to a man who had been known for his honesty, his hard work, his kindness, and his deep love for his wife and family. The preacher spoke about a life well lived, about love that endured, about the legacy Dawson left behind. Zara sat in the front pew, flanked by her children, and listened to the tributes with tears streaming down her face. The loneliness she had feared for so long tried to creep back in, whispering that she was alone again, that everyone she loved would eventually leave her. But then Emma squeezed her hand, and Thomas put his arm around her shoulders, and Grace leaned her head against her mother's shoulder, and Zara realized that Dawson had been right. She was not alone. She would never be alone again, because he had made sure of it. He had given her family, community, connections that would sustain her even in his absence. In the weeks and months after Dawson's death, Zara grieved deeply. The house felt too quiet without his presence, the bed too empty without him beside her. She missed his voice, his laugh, the way he would look at her first thing in the morning like she was still the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. She missed their conversations, their shared silences, the comfortable rhythm they had developed over 4 decades together. But she was not alone in her grief. Thomas moved his family into the main ranch house so she would not have to stay there by herself. Emma visited several times a week, bringing medicinal teas and sitting with her mother while she cried. Grace wrote long letters from her own ranch, sharing memories of her father and expressing her love. The grandchildren, too young to fully understand death but old enough to sense their grandmother's sadness, tried to cheer her up with drawings and flowers and enthusiastic hugs. Slowly, gradually, Zara found her way back to living. She would never stop missing Dawson, never stop grieving the loss of him. But she also knew he would not want her to stop living. He had spent 40 years making sure she knew how to connect with people, how to find joy, how to be present in her life. She owed it to his memory to keep doing those things. On what would have been their 41st wedding anniversary, Zara rode out to the spot where Dawson had first shown her the frame of their house. The house still stood, now expanded and improved, full of family and life. She sat under the cottonwood trees and talked to Dawson as if he could hear her. "I miss you," she said to the wind. "Every single day I miss you, but I am all right, my love. You made sure of that. You gave me so much. Love, family, purpose, connection. I came to Fort Worth to escape loneliness, and you made sure I never felt it again. Even now, without you here, I am not lonely. Because everywhere I look, I see evidence of the life we built together. Our children, our grandchildren, this land, this house, this community. You are in all of it, Dawson. You will always be with me." The wind rustled through the cottonwood leaves, and Zara chose to believe it was Dawson's way of answering her. She sat there until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, just like that evening 41 years ago when she had told him about the baby, and he had been so happy he cried. Zara lived for another 12 years after Dawson's death, surrounded by her loving family. She watched more grandchildren grow up and marry and have children of their own. She saw the ranch continue to prosper under Thomas's management. She attended Emma's lectures at medical conferences, where her daughter shared innovative healing techniques. She helped Grace break and train horses, her daughter's enthusiasm and skill making her heart swell with pride. She grew old gracefully, her dark hair turning silver, her face etching deeper with lines, her body growing frail. But her mind stayed sharp, and her capacity for love never diminished. She told stories about Dawson to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive for the generations who had never known him or who had been too young to remember him well. On a warm spring morning in 1919, Zara Ashford Turner died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 86. She was surrounded by family, Thomas holding one hand, Emma holding the other, Grace sitting at the foot of the bed, grandchildren and great-grandchildren filling the room. Her last words were, "I see him. Dawson is here." And then she smiled and closed her eyes for the final time. They buried her next to Dawson on the ranch they had built together, under the cottonwood trees where they had spent their wedding night and dreamed about the future. The whole town of Fort Worth came to pay their respects to a woman who had been a pillar of the community for over 4 decades, a successful businesswoman, a devoted mother, and above all, proof that love could heal even the deepest loneliness. At the funeral, Thomas spoke about his parents' love story. He told the assembled crowd about how his mother had come to Fort Worth running from loneliness, and how his father had made sure she never felt alone again. He spoke about the life they had built from nothing, about the legacy of love they had left behind, about how their example had shaped not just their family but the entire community. "My father once told me," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion, "that the best thing he ever did was have the courage to speak to a lonely woman in a window. And my mother told me that the best decision she ever made was to let that cowboy into her heart." Together, they showed us all what real love looks like. Not perfect, not easy, but constant, faithful, strong enough to heal wounds and bridge loneliness and build something lasting. As the preacher said the final words and the family began to disperse, Thomas stayed behind at the grave. He looked at the 2 headstones, side by side, and thought about everything his parents had built. The ranch that now supported 3 generations of family. The store that still thrived in town. The dozens of descendants who carried their blood and their values. But more than the material legacy, they had left behind something more precious. The knowledge that loneliness did not have to be permanent, that connection was possible even for the most isolated souls, that love could transform everything. His mother had come to Fort Worth desperate and alone, and his father had made sure she never felt that way again. In doing so, they had created a family, a community, a legacy that would endure long after they were both gone. The sun was setting as Thomas finally left the gravesite, painting the sky in those familiar shades of gold and pink his parents had loved so much. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed and horses whinnied and children laughed. The sounds of life continuing, of the legacy living on, of love echoing through generations. Zara had come to escape her loneliness, and the cowboy had made sure she never felt alone again. It was a simple story, really, but it was also the foundation upon which everything else had been built. And in the end, it was more than enough. It was everything.